Right, so hello and welcome back to What the Dickens. The countdown is nearing to a close. Today I'm going to be talking about my third favourite Dickens novel, which is the magnificent Little Dorrit. Chapter 1. Sun and Shadow. 30 years ago, Marseille lay burning in the sun one day. A blazing sun upon a fierce August day was no greater rarity in southern France then than at any other time before, since everything in Marseille and about Marseille had stared at the fervid sky and had been stared at in return until a staring habit had become universal there. Strangers were stared out of countenance by staring white houses, staring white walls, staring white streets, staring tracts of arid road, staring hills from which verdure was burnt away. The only thing to be seen not fixedly staring and glaring were the vines drooping under their loads of grapes. They did occasionally wink a little as a hot air barely moved their faint leaves. So I have just been reading from my beautiful first edition of Little Dorrit. I got this for my 18th birthday. It is from 1857. I have shown you my Little Dorrit first edition before, but I thought this would be another opportunity to show you. Look at the illustrations, and it's so old and the binding is lovely, and I'm going to put this back on the shelf where it can be safe, but I'm very fond of this physical book as well as the novel within it. So I first read Little Dorrit when I was 15 years old. At the time, back in 2008, there was a TV adaptation of Little Dorrit, which I will talk about more at the end, and I watched the first episode and I loved it so much that I immediately went out and bought the book and read it within about a week or two. I absolutely loved it at the time. I still absolutely loved it. I studied it on my dissertation and I have read it many times. It is one of my favourites. It is my third favourite Dickens, but I should say that my top three are all like, they're pretty high up there. Basically, I thoroughly love Little Dorrit. I think it is a brilliant, wonderful book, and I just love it. It's great. Anyway, so what is Little Dorrit actually about? The novel Little Dorrit takes its name from one character, Amy Dorrit, often referred to as Little Dorrit. Amy Dorrit is 22 years old, but she looks very young and she's very small and slight, which is why she is still referred to as Little Dorrit. Now, Little Dorrit was born inside the Marshalsea debtors' prison. The Marshalsea was a debtors' prison in London during the first half of the 19th century. So Little Dorrit was born inside the Marshalsea prison because her father has been inside that prison for debt for a very long time. Amy Dorrit lives inside the Marshalsea prison with her father. Her father is imprisoned there for debt, so Amy Dorrit can leave and go about as she wants, but her father is stuck permanently there. Also in the family, Amy has an elder brother and an elder sister, and she also has an uncle, Frederick Dorrit, who I adore. Amy Dorrit's father has been in the Marshalsea prison so long that he is very dependent on it, and that he really feels proud of the position and the respect that he has within the prison, and Amy Dorrit lives there with him, goes out during the day to work and comes back at night to look after him. She is the one that supports the family. She is the one that does the accounts. She is a fascinating female Victorian heroine. Anyway, to earn money to feed her family, Amy Dorrit goes out during the day to work. She works as a seamstress for an older woman called Mrs. Clennam. Mrs. Clennam is paralysed and can barely move, and she is quite a harsh, cold woman. And at the beginning of the book, Mrs. Clennam's son, Arthur Clennam, returns home from a long time abroad. Arthur Clennam is about 40 years old. His father died quite a while ago, and on his deathbed his father admitted that there was some kind of secret within their family that Arthur Clennam has not quite solved. So he has a very difficult relationship with his mother, and him and Amy Dorrit are sort of the two central characters. We partly follow Amy Dorrit in her work for Mrs. Clennam and in her life in trying to support her father and the difficulty she has with her family, and we also follow Arthur Clennam, his relationships and his desire to kind of make something of himself because he feels like he hasn't done much with his life. Arthur Clennam develops a kind of protective interest in Little Dorrit because he sees her difficult family situation, which she has in fact concealed from Mrs. Clennam. Arthur really wants to help her as much as he can, and they kind of develop a friendship. In the meantime, there is lots of other drama going on. As always, there are a lot of other characters. There is a sinister foreigner who kind of goes by many names, who kind of infiltrates into Mrs. Clennam's household and seems to have this kind of hold over her that Arthur can't quite understand. A young man who is a turnkey at the Marshalsea prison and is desperately in love with Amy Dorrit. John Chivery tries to root into the Dorrit family past to see if he can find any information that will help them. As always with Dickens, there is a whole fascinating cast of characters from all walks of life, from all classes, a really wide mix of people, including a struggling artist, a woman with a tortured past, a girl who has been adopted and is really struggling with the position within the family that she has because she feels subservient to them. We also have Daniel Joyce, who is an inventor and a really interesting kind of nice, pleasant character. We also have the brilliant and weird Mr. Panks. There's just so many characters in Little Dorrit that are wonderful. As you can already tell, there are many things that I love about Little Dorrit. There are so many brilliant characters in it. I think Amy herself as a heroine is very interesting because she isn't pathetic. She is physically small, but she is actually very impressive. As I said, she is the one that does the accounts. She is the clever one of the family. She is the one that manages everybody else. And although she looks smaller than her years, she often acts older than her years. Although Little Dorrit is referred to as Little Dorrit, she is by no means weak. She is a very strong, complicated character. A bit like Little Nell and her grandfather in the old curiosity shop, Little Dorrit and her father have a complicated relationship. Little Dorrit does struggle with her father's behaviour at times, but she always tries to act for the best, and she is so caring but also so clever and so aware in a really lovely, brilliant way. I think she's such a fascinating character, especially because she is someone that goes out and works. She is not like those early Dickensian heroines who have no personality. She is so much more complicated and fully formed from that. I also love the relationship between her and Arthur Clenham. I think it's developed really well, and their friendship is just done well, and the kind of interest that they feel in each other even before they have a proper friendship is really well kind of constructed, because he feels kind of protective over her and she does not want anyone to protect her because she wants to protect herself in a way that is cool and good in Victorian literature. I like to see that happening anyway. And some of the kind of changing in kind of power dynamics between Amy and Arthur in like the later parts of the novel are really cool and interesting. I also think Arthur is a really interesting character. He's quite different from some of Dickens's other heroes in that he is not a young handsome man like Nicholas Nickleby. He is an older man who has struggled with his life, who is often quite gloomy, but that makes him kind of all the more interesting because he has this past and he doesn't really know what to make of his life, and he's a really complicated character. Amy's family as well I think are done brilliantly. I love her uncle. Her uncle I just want to give a big hug to, and her father is such a complicated figure because you feel sorry for him but he also really irritates you. And I think as well her sister Fanny Dorrit is very interesting. Fanny early on in the book is a dancer and attracts the attention of a gentleman who basically would quite like to kind of get with Fanny and ruin her character, and the way she behaves towards him and the kind of power she begins to hold over him and also hold over his mother becomes very fascinating in a really interesting way. I also think the plot of Little Dorrit is just brilliant. The whole structure of the novel is very good, and I don't think it is what you expect it to be when you start reading it. You know, things do take you by surprise in Little Dorrit in a really great way. I don't think it goes in the way you necessarily expect it to, and it's very complicated. It has a lot of layers within the plot. It takes you all over the world from London to France to Venice in a way that is brilliant, because I do love it when Dickens kind of goes a-travelling in his books. It's so much fun, and you can kind of tell that it's been taken from some of his experience because Dickens did really like to travel. I think the tension and build-up in Bleak House and the secrets going on beneath the surface are just brilliant. I think it also, some aspects of the ending are some of the like strongest closing bits in all of Dickens. There are some brilliant things that occur at the end. Another fascinating, brilliant aspect of Little Dorrit. There's a character in Little Dorrit called Mr. Merdle, who is a very wealthy man who comes very quickly to prominence, and everyone is investing in his company. Suddenly everyone is investing in what he is doing, and it seems like a certain way to make a lot of money. And his presentation and his storyline and what happens to him is fascinating from a Victorian historical perspective and from a literary perspective. It's done so well. He's this enigmatic figure that you don't see much of, but what you see is the effect of his kind of business empire in a way around him, and that bit of Little Dorrit is brilliant and I think ages really well into today's society with stuff like the recession, kind of the financial aspects and problems in Little Dorrit. The theme of money, which is so central to this book, you know, it's about a debtor's prison and it is about making money and people investing, and that aspect of it I really love because I think it's a bit different from some of Dickens's other novels. We see a similar concern with money in Our Mutual Friend, and Little Dorrit and Our Mutual Friend, a concern with money as a thing, what money does to people, the way fortunes and greed and money can affect people, and that I really love about both of those books. And in Little Dorrit it is done so well. Mr. Merdle, what a character. His plotline is just brilliant, so fascinating and quite different from stuff you get in a lot of the rest of Dickens and a lot of the rest of Victorian literature. I also think in Little Dorrit we have one of the best, most believable, most realistic romantic relationships in all of Dickens. I've spoken before about how much it irritates me in Nicholas Nickleby and some of his earlier books where characters just kind of get together and go and get married after they've spoken like 2 sentences to each other, and Little Dorrit deals with romance and love in a much more complicated, brilliant, wonderful way. And another thing, we have talked quite a lot about gender in the last 2 weeks because, as you know, I love Dickens, and one of my biggest interests within Dickens novels is gender. That's what I wrote my undergrad dissertation on, and so I'm sorry that I've been going on about gender a lot in the last 2 weeks, but I have a lot to say about it when it comes to Dickens. In Little Dorrit, I think we have really interesting bring different perspectives on gender. As I said, Amy Dorrit is not pathetic. She's a very, very complicated, very strong character, and she is very, very intelligent, and she goes out and works quite a lot throughout the book, and at times when she isn't going out to work, she feels that lack of it. She wants to be doing something in a kind of similar way to Esther Summerson, but in a much more complicated way. I also think Arthur Clennam is a very interesting male character. He is quite different, again, to quite a lot of Dickens's early heroes, and the way he develops over the book and his masculinity is done really, really well. There's even a bit where Arthur Clennam cries and Dickens describes his tears as manly, and that, in a Victorian novel, you don't know how, like, brilliant that is. In general, in the Victorian period, for men to be displaying emotions was not considered gentlemanly, you know? It was gentlemanly to not be emotional, and Dickens breaks this in Little Dorrit with the character of Arthur Clennam, and also with the character of John Chivery, who is really emotional, but also Dickens describes as a hero, and clearly has a lot of respect for this man, as well as for Arthur Clennam. In a lot of Dickens, we have this kind of battle between emotional women and unemotional men. I'll talk about that a bit more tomorrow, but in Little Dorrit we have something slightly different in that Arthur Clennam is much more emotional than his mother, and that kind of dynamic is really interesting from a kind of Victorian gender perspective. It's just great. There is just so much in Little Dorrit to love. The intrigue, the drama, the characters. I still haven't even mentioned Tatty Coram and Miss Wade. There is an awesome book by someone called Holly Furneaux called Queer Dickens, which is all about where you can see like homosexual relationships and kind of diverse family setups in Dickens. It's a fascinating book. Some of it I feel she takes it a bit too far, but there are two characters in Dickens which she points out are gay, even though Dickens didn't write them to be so, and once you think that, it's really hard to read them not as gay. One is General George from Bleak House, the other is Miss Wade from Little Dorrit, and Miss Wade is a really, really interesting character in terms of her perspective on men and the things she says about men, and also her kind of obsession with this girl, Tatty Coram, who she tries to take under her wing, and then Tatty Coram kind of becomes caught by her in a really complicated way. There are issues of class, there are issues of money, there are issues of what it means to be respectable, what it means to be a gentleman or a lady, there are issues of poverty and debt, there are issues of crime, there are issues of fear, and there are issues of sort of the power that people can have over other people and what damage that can do. There are issues of growing up and age and how people change over time. There are issues of kind of morality and hypocrisy. There's just so much dealt with in Little Dorrit, and it's brilliant. It is a wonderful, wonderful examination of society in the 19th century, and the social critique is wonderful, and the characters are brilliant, and the plot is just fabulous. I just love it. I love it so much. So much. I've been trying to talk about things I like less about every Dickens book. There aren't many for Little Dorrit. I have to say, one of the main villains, a man who often goes by the name of Blandois, though sometimes goes by other names, he's not my favourite villain. I don't think he's actually that well developed or interesting, and he at times feels a little bit caricatured in a way that a lot of other characters in Little Dorrit are not, and one of the final reveals in Little Dorrit is a bit overcomplicated. As I said before, I think there are some brilliant things about the ending. There are some things I think are fabulous, but there is one little bit in the kind of ultimate reveal in Little Dorrit which is a bit kind of overcomplicated and you can't quite believe, or it's just said in a way that you get a little bit confused. But that's all. I love Little Dorrit so much. I have very little bad things to say about it because it is such a brilliant, wonderful book. I adore it. I think it's wonderful. I think it's a brilliant place to start with Dickens. I think it's a brilliant place to carry on with Dickens. Just think everyone should read it because it is wonderful. My third favourite Dickens, one of my favourite books of all time, probably in my top 10. It's just incredible. It's brilliant. I love it so much. Highly, 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 highly recommend. As promised, I do want to quickly mention this TV adaptation from 2008. This was done in a similar style to the Bleak House adaptation from 2005, in that it was done in half-hour episodes, a form I think works really well. The acting throughout this is really superb. Claire Foy as Amy Dorrit is just brilliant, and Matthew McFadden, who I always adore, is brilliant as Arthur Clennam and really brings everything to the character and just works really well. All in all, it's such a good adaptation. It looks brilliant, it's acted brilliantly, it's written very well. With the exception of the last episode, they kind of messed up the final reveal quite a lot. I've mentioned that in the book it's a bit overcomplicated, and in this they kind of triply overcomplicate it, so I think everyone at the end was like, hang on a second, what? I don't know why they did that. It was really, really weird. The final reveal was written quite badly. Apart from that, everything about this adaptation is brilliant. I love it. It's so good and just brilliant. Yeah. What an adaptation, it's great. So basically, as you can tell, I love Little Dorrit quite a lot, and I don't have much else to say. It is a brilliant book. Please go and read it. If you have read Little Dorrit, please let me know what you thought of it, and if you loved it as much as me, I would really like to know, because it is brilliant. I'll be back tomorrow talking about my second favourite Dickens novel. I'm sure you can't even imagine that there'll be more enthusiasm than I've had to give today, but there will. There will. Okay.